Funding for Inner Compass is provided by Calvin College.
The life that's unfolding,
the world that awaits,
gifts that are yours to explore,
and God's to use.
It's all happening here at Calvin.
Welcome to Inner Compass. I'm Shirley Hoogstra. Imagine if you're a Hollywood producer and you decide to walk away from a famous job of producing General Hospital and the doctors in order to instead film the poor in the slums of Brazil. His work today is to help us as viewers understand the poorest of the poor and care about it. It is a riches to rags story you will not forget. Join us on Inner Compass.
From the campus of Calvin College, this is Inner Compass, exploring how people use faith and ethics to guide them through critical issues of today.
My guest today is filmmaker, photographer, and author Gerry Straub, founder of the San Damiano Foundation, which is a Franciscan ministry devoted to putting the power of film at the service of the poor. Gerry was a guest of the January series at Calvin College. Welcome, Gerry.
Well, thank you. It's great to be here.
So you have had one life, which was the life of Hollywood and film producing there, and now you have a life of putting your talents to the service of the poor. How does this past life help you when you are working for the poor?
Oh, well, first off, to make films, I have the necessary skills. I know how to tell a story, and beyond that, in making these films, I have connections from a lifetime in television who donate their services to help me make the films that are very, very inexpensive costs. For example, Martin Sheen narrates one film. Bono gave me a song for another film. But people
and they do this as a gift to your work?
As a gift, right. And but many other people, the man who authors our DVDs, the guy that does the sound mix, all contribute their talents and vast experience to giving the films a very professional look. So
you have this ability to draw on what God gave you in your first life, in a way, to then use this for your next calling.
Right. I think for a while when I was first at a soup kitchen, I felt like I would love to just, dedicate my life to serving the poor that way. But I don't think even the hungry wouldn't want to eat the way I cook. So I only had one thing that I could do, and that was make films.
So how did you come to rededicate your talents of filmmaking on this project? Tell our audience about that.
From going from a soap opera producer to this?
Yes.
Well, actually, it's, I was in television. I started when I was, right out of high school, and my first job was, giving out tickets to the Ed Sullivan Show.
Okay.
It was 1964. The Beatles were on, and it was
Wow.
very, very exciting.
I bet.
And so I was just lured right into the whole world of showbiz and
celebrity.
And celebrity.
And fame.
Absolutely. And this culture is, obsessed with that.
Right.
At any rate, I was selected for an executive training job position during this interim summer job before college, and I decided to stay. And I was an executive before I was 21, and I had my own network show by the time I was 30. And it was all very, very exciting. I had lots of power and fame and prestige, and made more money than I knew what to do with. But there was a deep emptiness that I felt.
And you had been raised Catholic.
Oh yeah, but
were you practicing your faith during this time?
I think during this whole time, I tell people I worshipped on the altar of entertainment, and God just disappeared, totally disappeared. But I became disillusioned with television, not out of any spiritual reason or because what we were producing was such garbage, but simply because creatively. Television was really all about the commercials.
Okay.
The commercials were all about creating desires we actually don't have.
Right.
And we would do anything for the ratings point. The higher the ratings point, the more money the network could get for the commercials.
Okay.
And an NBC executive actually once told me that they really weren't interested in art. They wanted filler to keep the commercials from bumping into each other.
Wow.
So you began to I remember one day sitting and watching an episode of The Doctors at NBC in New York. Alec Baldwin was a young actor on the show.
Right.
And I remember watching an episode of the show and just thinking, well, who would watch this,
So it felt empty.
I really wanted to withdraw. When one of the shows was canceled, I wanted to withdraw and really kind of search for, well, where did God go in my life? You know,
So a Holy Spirit prompting is what we might say.
Yeah, you know, I guess you could
Right?
say. I mean,
Well,
it was just really, there was an emptiness.
Wow.
And I think many people try to fill that emptiness with all kinds of things, and
Right.
usually bad things.
Right.
And I began writing, and I wanted to write serious literature, and I began writing a novel, which really dealt with a guy that the protagonist really wanted to find God and could see no evidence of God. I mean, if you pick up any edition of the New York Times, I mean, it's just bad news from beginning to
Right.
end. You really don't see any evidence that God exists. And, you know, 90% of the people on earth profess a belief in God, but yet
Right.
their
Where is
lives
it?
don't reflect it. You
Right.
know, I mean, Jesus talks about, you know, loving your enemies. Well, where do we see
Where
that
do we see
today?
that
we
evidence?
bomb
Right.
our enemies, you know.
Right.
So it just seemed like the spirit of the gospel you certainly didn't see in society,
Right.
which is all based on greed and acquiring more and more, that we are individuals allowed to take all we want.
Right.
The gospel doesn't talk about that.
Well, you've even said that if we take more than we need, we're actually stealing.
Well, I've really come to believe that. I really come to believe that. I mean, Jesus spoke of this self-emptying love, of giving yourself away.
Because there's enough really to go around. So if we keep taking more and more and more, I guess some of us don't believe that there's enough to go around, that we have to get our own.
Well, there's enough for our need. There's not enough for our greed.
No.
And we just overconsume so much. And when you travel around the world and you see the conditions that so many people live in, it's horrifying. I mean, some of these massive slums, no electricity, you know, no running water, open sewers. I mean, it's just it just tears you apart.
And while you were in this stage of writing a book, and I know it was a couple of books, but you get to a Franciscan church in Italy.
Right. Well, actually what I did was there was when I was writing another book, I was exploring the connection between creativity and spirituality, and writing about Vincent van Gogh
Right.
and St. Francis, and Vincent represented creativity and St. Francis represented spirituality. I was interested in Vincent.
Okay, so you thought.
Yeah, because no artist had so thoroughly explored
Right.
the creative process as Vincent in these beautiful letters to his brother Theo.
Right.
St. Francis, on the other hand, to me was a pious fairy tale from the Middle Ages who had nothing to say to my modern skeptical life.
But this is the person who now is central to your work.
Right. Well, what happened is I worked on this book for about a year and a half. It was stuck. It was going nowhere. And I figured I had to throw in this literary towel, go back to Hollywood.
Right.
But before I did this, I wanted to go to Assisi and to all in the south of France, where Vincent had his most creative years, to see if I could feel something. I could be inspired by being in these places. And in Italy, I went into an empty church. Certainly not to pray. I went in to just sit down.
Right.
And I picked up a prayer book and opened it randomly to a Psalm 63 that spoke about a soul searching for God. And in an instant, I knew, not intellectually, but experientially, that God was real and that God loved me. And it wasn't, I didn't hear voices or see images. Because what I felt was beyond images and beyond words. I just felt immersed in the sea of love. And
Do you know what that sounds like to me when I hear you say that? It sounds in some ways like a very personal Damascus Road experience.
Yeah, I think for quite a long time I was really searching for God and just knocking. I would say
Right.
for 10 years. And then so in this quiet, not that I'm anything special, deserve anything. I don't deserve anything more than anyone else, but I was sincerely looking. And in this just quiet moment, this thing happened. I still can't explain it. In fact, afterwards I stood up and my first thought was jet lag. Nothing really happened. But
oh, that's the enemy saying, don't believe this, right?
yeah, but the more but it didn't go away. And then suddenly the writing shifted really from St. Francis to writing about, I'm reading from the
Vincent
focus
van Gogh.
from Vincent to Francis.
Right.
And when I began to just throw out this whole thing and write a book on St. Francis, what I couldn't understand in St. Francis's life was not only his love of the poor, but for poverty itself. For St. Francis, a radical, voluntary poverty was a a way of experiencing a radical dependency on God for everything. He had nothing.
Yet this radical dependency on God is the sort of transformational mindset, isn't it?
Yeah, well, yeah, because without God, I mean, we don't think in our daily life that every breath we take is a gift from God.
Right.
See, we actually have so much, we really don't need God.
Well, that's the problem.
Right.
I mean, that is the
Right.
challenge of the North American Christian, certainly, or any
Right.
wealthy
Right.
Christian,
Right.
is that God is an add-on.
Right.
And this
Right.
focus on poverty is that God is central.
It brings the centrality of God right into your life, and
Right.
you're dependent upon God for everything. But, you know, I could maybe understand this a little on a theoretical level, but on practical level, what does it mean?
Okay, what did you
in
do?
order to understand, I went to a soup kitchen run by Franciscan friars, the St. Francis Inn in Philadelphia, and there was another transformational experience, because there, I mean, my ideas of the homeless and drug addict were probably no different than anyone else. Why
Right.
don't they just
Stereotypes,
get
it together.
Get a job, or
Right,
you're
right.
you're on drugs because you're weak. You know, why
Right.
can't you get in a program? But when you go to a place like this, you meet real people, and you see that they're really no different than I am, and the bottom had just fallen
Right,
out.
and this is where we're going to look at some images, because I think you're right. To actually see it or experience it is going to help us understand the next pieces. Let's watch.
I have filmed in the worst slums on earth, seeing people earning a living scavenging through the waste of others in massive garbage dumps, encountering horribly disfigured lepers in the Amazon region of Brazil, spending months on the mean streets of Skid Row in downtown Los Angeles, walking the lonely migrant trail north from Central America in a journey that ends in a cruel death in the desert. For St. Francis, the Gospels were the only true guides for living at peace with others, including all of creation, and living in harmony with God.
Happiness isn't measured by how much you can acquire. I think it's maybe how much you can let go of.
What was it like in the abandoned building last night?
It was filthy. Rats running all around all night trying to eat you, or they'll go in your mouth for heat.
You have actually heard about rats going in your mouth?
Yes. Well, this is where I sleep. This is where I stay at right now. And it's cold, no windows, no door. If we can't find a bed at the shelter.
It's really incomprehensible to me that a human being would be spending a night in conditions like this. I'm just in a loss of words. I don't take photographs, I try to receive them. I try to enter into dialogue with the people I film. We have to show our love for God by how we treat the least of God's children, and that we have a responsibility to do something. You know, we're all one family, and that when one of us is hurting, we're all hurting. But beyond that, what I found was just so many actual, real people where the bottom just fell out.
If it wasn't for St. Francis Inn, I wouldn't be eating.
You know how cold it is today?
7 degrees.
You began to see how many people are just a paycheck or two away from having nothing. I think it's immoral that, you know, our lives are so centered on acquiring more things, when quite clearly the gospel has a totally different message. It's about caring for each other.
And the suffering is there not because of God. The suffering is there because of us, our unwillingness to share.
Christ isn't looking for us to give, you know, our spare change. He wants us to give our very lives.
When we hear the cries of the oppressed, the cries of the poor, we hear the voice of God. Where there is weakness, there is God. We need to ask God to shatter our complacency, to strip us of our need for comfort.
Gerry, when I watch that, I am overwhelmed.
I'm overwhelmed.
I'm overwhelmed by my own greed and my own materialism and my own stuff, and by my blindness to the poor.
I think, you know, it's so easy to turn away, and our whole culture tries to get us to turn away. That's what entertainment is all about.
Right. To forget.
But we can't turn away. We have an obligation to look, to see, and to react, and to show people the mercy and love of God.
Right.
When I was at the St. Francis Inn, I mean, this stuff seems and sounds so radical, but when I was at the St. Francis Inn, I went in no different than anyone else. But But I began to see that by judging people as weak or, lazy, or an alcoholic or a drug addict as weak. I heard one story of a young woman. She was a prostitute in her early 20s, looked twice that age.
Right.
And when she was 5, her parents put alcohol in her baby bottle, when she was an infant,
right.
to keep her from crying.
Right.
By the time she was 5, she was an alcoholic. So you saw these terrible stories, and you realized that by judging people, it eliminated our need to do anything. It's their fault they're
right.
homeless, it's
right.
their fault they're a drug addict.
Right.
But you begin to understand that Christ didn't judge people. He loved all. His love
right.
was all embracive and all inclusive. And you begin to understand that you just can't judge. And I think the importance of actually being with the poor is you get to experience their suffering and their pain and their story, and then you're able to respond out of that relationship. You're not, above,
right.
Looking down and coming up with answers without really knowing what the problem is.
And this is what you do with your films. You say, I never just click and shoot.
Oh, no.
You
no.
always form some kind of relationship before that happens.
Right. I think the films have their power, by my really entering into a relationship with people. In Skid Row, I spent 6 months on the streets,
right.
To get close to the homeless, because they were very skeptical of me. And you try not to, I tell people I don't really want to take pictures, I want to receive pictures. I want to receive what the poor will give to me.
Right.
And by entering into a relationship, it's, I'm seeing the reality of their lives, and I see how amazingly generous they are.
Well, you've said the poor teach us about our own poverty, weakness, and clinging selfishness, and you've just said they're generous.
Oh, they're incredibly generous. I can just go on with stories. I remember in Cabo San Lucas filming in this barrio. They have these wealthy hotels, and the
right.
people that work in the hotels live in these barrios of cardboard homes, and they treat
right.
them with oil and then and stolen electricity. There's a spark, and
it's just a flame.
It's a nightmare.
Right.
And this one guy he had been walked up and down the beach selling these little trinkets, and for 3 days he hadn't sold a thing. And he told me that he had this stomach, virus, and he was actually afraid to go home because he hadn't sold anything. And then when I went home, and I was traveling with a Franciscan friar, when we went to the barrio on this little barrio bus, he insisted on paying my bus fare because I was there to tell his story. And how people share from their absolute want,
right.
because you're a guest.
Right.
And you just see reality, it's... the poor can't hide behind any power, any money, any influence. They're just real. They're who they are.
So in the vulnerability comes the dependence, which is exactly what Scripture asks us to be, is dependent
right.
on God.
Right.
So it strips away all the obstacles to
absolutely.
that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. You have some film of the lepers, and you talk about how when you asked one of the lepers, how is life going? And there was this joy in the midst of what to an outside person would just seem like misery. How did you account for that?
When I show one film on lepers in the leprosarium in Manaus, Brazil, most people, and myself included, assume leprosy was eradicated
right.
long ago.
That's a Bible disease.
Right. And the seminal moment in St. Francis's life, he had a great fear of lepers, and he would go way out of his way to avoid them. But then one day he felt God telling him not to go out of his way, to literally get off his horse and embrace a leper. And I write about that in my book, but I didn't understand what a leper, the smell.
Right.
And when I went to Manaus, Brazil, and entered this leprosarium, I was so totally horrified. I was scared. But I asked this one leper how she was doing, and she said, very, very good.
Right.
Praise be to God. And it was like, my God.
Right.
Another leper in Kingston, Jamaica, George, I spent 2 days with him, and then he said, Gerry, would you like to hear me play the harmonica? And I said, sure. And he gets his harmonica in his hands.
No
and
fingers.
He holds the harmonica, and he
Right.
plays Amazing Grace in such a way.
Oh, my goodness.
That I'll never forget it. And so
Right.
when I encounter troubles in my life, or, just inconveniences, things that bother me, I think of George the leper.
Right.
You know, I think of so many people in the films, of how they survive and endure and cling to a faith in God that is just...
well, it's inspiring.
It's totally inspiring. Yeah.
You know, Gerry, when you talk about the lepers, when I've been reading about Mother Teresa and how she started the home for the lepers in Calcutta, and the images that I saw were, again, didn't make it real. And then I watched your film and I thought, they look grotesque. They're scary. It looks like something I've never seen before. And I thought, Mother Teresa was going, and the people who are working in those places that you're filming are entering right into that. And then Christ says, I am the leper. So what you do to this person, you've done it to me. And I thought to myself, how do people go day in and day out? And for Mother Teresa, it was about contemplative prayer. Her missionaries of charity, main purpose is to pray. The Franciscans pray. What part does prayer play in your work? How do you keep going into the dump or the Skid Row or the lepers and come out alive?
Well, St. Francis devoted fully half of his life to prayer, and he would go to these far-off mountaintop hermitages to seek to hear God's voice. And then when he heard, he would go down. The rest of the other 50% was in action, in doing and caring.
Right.
For me, and I think for most people, prayer is just something you try to squeeze into a day. And for me, if I don't give God the first 90 minutes to 2 hours of my day, then God gets no time. And so...
it's a discipline, isn't it?
Right. So the very, very first thing, I get up 2 hours earlier than whenever I have to leave the house, and that time is really devoted to entering into prayer, reading scripture, reading inspirational books, just sitting. It's where the thoughts come from, and so the whole thing rests on the foundation of prayer. And without that, you would be so overwhelmed in a place like this because the images are horrifying, and I don't forget them, but I think as you grow in this, you begin to learn to see the face of Christ, and you see the inner beauty of people, and then you have to begin to respond to the dignity within the people you meet, and that's what I see. I see this tremendous inner beauty and actually physical beauty. I mean, some of these lepers were just the most amazing people I've ever met.
And you always talk with them first, don't you, before you start? Because your films, you sense that you know them when you watch your films.
Well, that's the importance of entering into a relationship. You know, I don't think you can to do any work with the poor. I mean, so many people just look at it from afar. You really need to get down there and hear real stories, and then you're touched, and then you'll go, you know, deeper. Well, what is the cause of why is there such injustice? Why are we not willing to share? And really, mercy and compassion is at the core of all faiths. It's all through the Jewish, you know, the Anawim. How do we care for the Anawim, those who are just outside the realm of society? It's in Buddhism. It's definitely in Islam. Mercy and compassion. But yet we haven't really.
We flee.
We flee.
Now, your films are often intense, and they are long, and you need to be willing to stay present and watch the images and watch the stories. When you are asked to give a talk, or when you're asked to be on a program, people want to see excerpts. How do you feel about the excerpts request?
Well, I know that there are time limits that people have, and you have to be able to, you know, condense. But I try to fight against what I call this bumper sticker mentality, to reduce everything to a simple slogan. My feeling is, yes, and the films are long, and it's one of the knocks on them. But I feel if you really, in order to really enter deeply into it, you need to sit and in the course of a 2-hour film, and Room at the Inn is 2.5 hours, something begins to happen. You begin to surrender to the actual story, and some transformation begins to happen. So I think the length is really important to have a real experience, a real change. But we'd make the films in chapters, so I know that some people are only going to watch a little bit, but it's so hard to reduce this message into a soundbite, into a 3-minute clip. Does it feel
disrespectful to the people if it's too short, like it's exploitive?
You know, I'm certainly not exploiting people, but I just think everything in our society is too fast and too snappy, and we want simple, easy answers, and there are none. So I keep the films. I'm true to the spirit. When I work, my filming has become my way of praying, and so I'm in the moment. And the films are long because of what happens. If I ask one person a question, you know, and that question, like in Philadelphia about this guy Michael, who I went and spent an evening in an abandoned building with him, and he spoke about being afraid to fall asleep with his mouth open for fear that a rat would go in to stay warm. Just that one question, that one answer led me to go to the house with him. And so it's just opening it up. And so I just feel the films are as long as I need to communicate not only the person's story, but also to try to get people to understand their responsibility to do something. You just can't watch this, you have to do something.
And you've said in this to close with, you can't give your spare change. And so many times Christians want to give the extra, and you're saying it has to be their life.
Christ is not asking for our spare change. He's asking for our very life. And
this is what your films help us understand, isn't it?
I hope so.
My guest today has been filmmaker, photographer, and author Gerry Straub, founder of the San Damiano Foundation. Gerry was a guest of the January series at Calvin College. I'm Shirley Hoogstra, and thank you for watching Inner Compass.